Hi, Kevin Tharp here. Today we're going to go into the introduction to document structure and markup languages, which is the beginning of actually starting the development process with web content. So what we got here is what most people think of when they think of a web page. This is not actually the web page. What this is the result of the search engine. In this case, it happens to be Firefox. Taking and rendering the code so that you can see what the designer wanted you to see. Really, this is what sits in an HTML document, a web document. HTML meaning hypertext markup language. And what it is a document that follows a series of rules that allow it to be accessed by any browser that follows modern standards and allows it to be seen or rendered in a way that allows it to be visible the way that you had hoped it to be. There are some minor variations in the way that the various browsers render, but it's a lot better than it was before, and it's getting better all the time. But in order for that to work, where we have the ability to create a single HTML document that can be rendered in the same way by software in the form of browsers made by different companies, there have to be a set of rules, and those set of rules are what sits behind HTML. And you can see right up here at the beginning we've got the first statement in a document is a document type declaration, and what that does is it tells the browser or whatever software is trying to open this file what kind of document it is. In this case, it's an HTML document, so whatever software encounters this is going to know that it needs to treat this as an HTML document and render it as a web page if it is able to do so. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is document structure, and you'll see in here inside this code there are various elements that allow it to tell the browser how to render this, and we're going to go in and we're going to start looking at those. Now the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to bring up Dreamweaver, because that happens to be the software that I most often use when I'm doing my development work, and I'm going to create a new page and show you what that looks like. So I'm just going to go in and I'm going to create a new HTML document. And you'll notice that I've got it as HTML5. Whatever software you're using, if it is a integrated package for web design, is going to allow you to designate which kind of page you want to create. Just so that you can see an example of that, if this happens to be Microsoft Visual Studio, if I came in here and chose a new file, I would choose the type of file that I wanted to create, in this case an HTML page, and I would have it add. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a core document structure. And you'll notice when we go to the HTML5 document in Dreamweaver, that's going to have an almost identical document structure, because there is a set of core elements that make up the base structure of the document. And we'll take a look at that at first. The first thing that we have is this doc type declaration, and what that is doing is that is establishing what kind of document this is. In this case, it's HTML. Now if I had chosen to do a different type of document, for instance, say I had decided to do an XML document, it would come in here and it would tell me right up there that it is XML, and it would tell me the version and then this encoding, which tells me which keyboard language in order to use in order to interpret that. And so we've got that document type declaration right at the very beginning. Other types of files that you can create that you will be using in this class is a CSS document. And when you come in there, again, it lists the character set, the UTF-8, which is the standard keyboard setting for Western languages, and then it says in here that it is a CSS document, and that is actually commented out. So the different types of documents that you create are going to have different set of information at the very beginning. Now, HTML, Hypertext Markup Language, happens to be a built up from XML. XML is the Extensible Markup Language, and what that does is it allows for, it's got a set of overriding rules that define the syntax and the rules of how you can create other markup languages. And HTML5 or HTML will be working with HTML5 because that is the currently emerging standard that websites are being designed under. But those rules are pre-established so that if you come in here and you see a document type of HTML, then there are a couple things that have to happen. First off, you have to have this HTML tag, and that HTML tag has got to have an opening, which is that right there, and it has to have a closing tag. And what those two tags do is that they declare that everything inside of them is an HTML document. So that is the base that has to be on the outside. Then within that HTML document, you've got a head section, and that whole section right there is the head. It opens with a head open tag, and it closes with a closing tag. And the difference between the opening and the closing tags here is that there it just says head, and here it's got that / head. So that means whereas head is the opening tag, / head is the closing. And that is the standard that is used in most of the elements that you're going to use in HTML. There are some that don't have the closing tags. For instance, the meta does not have a closing tag. So you have to put all the properties of the meta within the greater than and less than tag characters that are there so that you can include them in there. Now we've also got a standard where there is a title tag inside of the head. And the way that that title tag is used is that, and I'm going back to this website here, whatever is in that title tag will be human readable. It will be visible to the world. And so this, if I go in and look at the source code, and what I did is I right click there. I happen to be in Firefox at the moment. All the browsers have some way of allowing you to view the page source. When I open that page source and I come inside, I see the HTML, obviously the doc type declaration, and then I find the head, and inside the head I find this title tag. And inside that title tag you've got your opening tag there, title, your closing tag there, title, and then inside of it we have this text. This content is human readable, and it shows up in this location up here, and it also shows up as the first line when your page is showing up in search results like from Google or Bing or Yahoo or one of those. That title tag is the first information that is normally provided, and that comes from that location inside the head. So for the most part, everything inside this head section is actually designed to be read by the computers, not seen by the humans, so that when the bots come through looking at your website from Google or Bing or the other search engine bots that gather information from the web, they're going to look at this and they're going to see, and that information in there is going to tell them a lot of information about the site and the content of it. And so your browser is also going to look at this, and it's going to see things like the character set, and it's going to see that the title is in there and know that it needs to put that up there. So these are mostly rules for non-human actors. The next thing after the head is the body. And in the body is going to contain all of the information that shows up and is visible within the browser. So it starts up there and it comes all the way down here. And so everything that is going to be seen inside the browser has got to live inside of that inside of the body tag. and that is, just as it says, it's a semantic markup language. So semantic markup language means that HTML5 is a semantic markup language, and that's actually where HTML5 is different than the previous versions of HTML5, in that it takes that semantic information to a higher level. So that if we see this tag head, that means that, and that is a reserved tag. You cannot use head anywhere except for here. You can't use the tag body anywhere except for here, because these are reserved for developing the document structure. But what that and all the future elements you're going to learn about are, they're semantic, meaning that when you give it a tag in HTML, it's going to have a meaning. So that here we see body. That means that everything that's sitting inside the body tag is going to be the main body of the website. Looking through some other ones, you see here div. Div is basically, it means division, and what that means is that there is it's sort of a container, a box. You'll hear me talk about boxes a lot. It is a element that can contain other elements. It's a division. It's a separation from other content, and it serves as a tool that we can use to group the information within it, so that when we start to moving it around the pages and such, it's there. Now we've got the div there, but we've also inside, you'll notice inside the tag here, we've given it an ID of container. So we've got the div, which is the element itself, and then the ID specifies those are properties of that element. So the ID is a property of div, and it happens to be that the div has the ID of container. So container is the ID for this div. So anytime that I want to address this particular div, and we'll learn about that in the behavioral the presentation sections, what I would do is I would specify when there's an ID of container, and then tell it what rules to apply, and it would come back and it would find this and apply it. And you'll learn more about that as we go on. More semantic markup language. We've got the header, which basically, that is new in HTML5. That we used to use a div with an ID of header, but that was in such common use that they've added to HTML5 and made that a semantic element of header. And what that specifies is that that is going to be the top of a section of information that is related to that header. Usually it's going to be used at the top of a page, but it can be used within the page as well, so that you can have multiple headers within the page. But the proper way to use it is to only use it when there is going to be other related content to that. So we've got our header there. It opens there, and again it has to close there. And you'll notice that I've put a comment in there that indicates that that's the end of the header. And that comment is really, that's for people who are going through and looking at your code. It helps you to keep track of your code by adding these comment elements, which are not read and interpreted by the browser. So I've got a header here. And then next to it is a H1. Now an H1 is a heading level 1. Now that should not be confused with the head or the header. Now those three elements are probably the most confusing ones on here, because we've got the head, which is the part of the page that is not readable by humans. We've got the header, which is like the thing that goes across the top of a newspaper. The header, everything underneath this is going to be related to that. But then we've got heading level 1, or H1s, and you can have H1 through H6. And what each of those does is it designates the relative importance of the content that's going to sit inside of that particular element. So if we go back here, this is an important part of the page, is my name. Having my name up in there is an important part of it. The reason that we want to make sure that we use that semantic markup and we introduce now the rule of form follows function. The reason I do that as a H1 rather than as a paragraph or some other tag is that what I'm doing is I'm telling the browsers that this is important, and along the lines I'm also telling the search engine the search engines that this is a top level piece of information. An H2 would be a secondary level. So we've got the H1, H2 would be secondary, and then it goes third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. But what that's doing is it's establishing a structure for that content to show with semantic markup the relative importance of the content that's going to be in there in relationship to the page as a whole. What you could do is you could think about that as being the same as an outline when you're using a program such as Microsoft Word. To illustrate this further, what I've done is I've brought up the syllabus for this class for the semester where I'm making this recording. And what you'll see is over here there's a navigation section. Here's the actual syllabus itself. And it's no different than any other syllabus in the world except for this particular words, except that I have used a semantic form of markup in order to create this document. And the way that I did that is by using these things that are built into Word and other word processors. Like here you'll see the style is heading level 1. Here you'll see the style is heading level 2. Now that's not exactly the same, heading level 3, as for a web page, but the idea is the same. You're developing a structure to that so that if I have an H1 and inside of there I'm going to have some H2s, instructor, meeting time and location. So that's developing, really it's developing this as an outline so that if a search engine or something like that is coming through your page, or if you've got a person who is using a assistive device for the blind, they're able to see these headings without having to see all the content in between them, so that they can skip between these headings. And that is the importance of using semantic markup, is so that instead of this just being a flat document where all the information is of the same importance, by adding those heading levels the same way you do in a website, then it allows, one, for this type of navigation, but it allows for establishing the structure of the document itself. And that structure in this particular Word document can be seen over here in the form of this. Now, if I switched to the outline view, you would see the same kind of thing where I've got the ability to open and close those different sections of the outline, and that is based upon the ability for it to know that the content that sits within that is a part of that particular section of the page. So it's establishing a structure that develops the content in the page into sections, and that is a crucial thing that you're going to need to understand in this class. So when we're talking about structure, the same as for that web document, there's going to be different rules that you can use. For instance, we've already talked about the H1. We've got nav. It's telling it this is the navigation, so everything in here is the nav. Then I've got the H2s, so everything that sits inside of that H2, and you can tell by looking for the closing H2, and everything that sits within that would belong within that H2. Now this H2 just happens to hold this, but this other content, it would be recognized, sits inside of that H2. So that's what we're doing. And when you come in and look at the rendered page, you're going to be able to see differences. Like over here, you've got the H1 is in relatively large font. When I go to my H2s, they'll be even lower. And if I used H3s or below, it would be in here. The nav all sits here together inside of this nav div. And so that's the reason that we develop a document structure, so that One, we have the ability to move pieces around that belong with each other. So I can move the nav, and everything that belongs to the nav will go with it. But also because it establishes that understanding of the meaning of the content that is in there. And the last example that I'll show you is, here's a footer. We've got the footer in here until we have the closing footer tag, which is right here. All of that is going to sit at the bottom of the page. And so that would be, and let me just move this a little bit. That would be right down here, the stuff in the footer. Now I could apply a different color to the footer so that it will all sit in there. The other thing that you'll see is over here that there isn't a thing that's called an aside. And that aside is right there. And this is another new element of HTML5, is that ability to say that this content is related to the main content of the page, but it's a sidebar. It's an aside element. So it's not part of the main content, but it is something that is related to it. Now I'd like to go into a couple of the elements that you're going to use regularly, and this happens to be the Dreamweaver interface right here, but it's going to show up similar in everything, whatever software that you do. If I wanted to have a heading level 1, then I would enter that in there. The first thing that you'll notice that has happened over here is it put that in as a paragraph. A paragraph is not the same as a heading. A paragraph is again, going to the idea of form follows function. If something is a paragraph of content, then it goes into a paragraph tag. However, I don't want this to be a paragraph. I want this to be a heading level 1. So I'm going to assign it that property, and you'll notice that it changes to H1. And then I can do the same thing for the others. And I'll just go through the first 3. And so I select that, I give it the property of heading level 2, and whatever software I'm using to look at it does is it applies a default set of styles to this. And you'll learn more about how to override those default styles and later on. So these, you'll notice that as it goes from heading 1 to heading 2 to heading 3, the font size gets smaller because there's a built-in style sheet that tells it what to do. And we'll talk about style sheets in another video. But then you see it over here, and let me get rid of those 2 paragraphs that don't belong in there. And that extraneous character. So we've got heading level 1, heading 2, heading 3. Now I want to enter a paragraph, and I'll just say paragraph. And you'll notice that over here in the code view, when I didn't designate as anything else and I was typing in this window, it gave it this opening and closing P tag. P stands for paragraph. And the standard thing for a paragraph is, and I'll go ahead and put paragraph 2 in this one so you can see. So I put in that text for paragraph 2, and what you'll see is that when I have a paragraph, after that paragraph closes, there's a blank line, and then it begins paragraph 2. Now, there's another element that is used in here, and it's more of a visual element than a semantic, and that is a line break. So if I wanted to have this drop down a line, but I didn't want it to be a new paragraph, then I would enter the BR, and you'll notice that the code here came as BR. Now when I was working on my keyboard, all I did is a shift enter, and that automatically entered that BR. If I had just done an enter, then it would, and I'll go ahead and show you here, if I did an enter, then what it does is it puts a closing paragraph tag and then a opening paragraph tag, and that ends up leaving that space in between. So again, following the rule of form follows function, You only use a paragraph when you want it to actually indicate that structurally it is a paragraph. You use a line break when you want to show visually something dropping down to the next line within that same paragraph. The next element that I would like to show is a set of lists. And so I'm going to come in here. And I'm going to select these, and you'll notice that because I didn't apply anything else, it set them up as paragraphs. But what I want them to do is, and I'm coming down into the widgets now, and this happens to be in Dreamweaver, but the same kind of thing happens in your other softwares that you may be using, as long as it's not just a code editor. If I want that to be a bulleted list, the proper term for a bulleted list is an unordered list. I would apply that, and based upon the default style sheet, it's going to give me bullets in the front there, no spaces in between the lines, and it's going to make it a list like that. Now, you have the ability to change those presentation characters in a style sheet, and we'll talk about that again on another. Now, the counterpart to an unordered list is an ordered list, and in this case, instead of bullets, it has numbers that sit in there to represent what is in the list. Now there's some other things. There's a series of special characters that you will encounter. The first one is this NBSP. So when you have a paragraph with nothing in it, it puts that ampersand sign, which tells it that it is representing a character. And then NBSP, which in this case means non-breaking space, and then the semicolon, which indicates the end of that element, and it sits within a paragraph, and that puts a paragraph with with just space in it. You can use non-breaking spaces to create white space, though extensive use of it is not the proper way. Instead, you would use cascading style sheets to do that. Now there are other characters, and they're referenced in the textbook, and they're available out on the web. But for instance, if I wanted to use the copyright symbol, what I would do is I would use this special character code here, and I would insert that into the code side of my page, and it would give me that character. Now if I pasted that code into the design side of this, what it's going to do is it's going to put code in here that represents that. So that and amp semicolon represents the ampersand sign, because that's a reserved character. So you actually have to put the code into it. And then there's the copy and the semicolon. So this is just text in this case, because of it added the code in order to the special character code to represent the ampersand, so that you could escape from the reading code view and use it to apply that code. We've already talked a little bit about the div element. The div, again, is a way of creating a box that can hold other elements. I'm going to choose the Dreamweaver interface to do this. I could easily type this, and it gives me options to of where I can insert this div. I'm just going to choose the insertion point, but there's other options that are there. I could give it a class or an ID, or I don't have to. I'm going to go ahead and just give this an ID of sample, and I'm not going to create a new CSS rule because we're not to that yet. The difference between class and ID: class can have multiple instances of the same class on the same page. In an ID, that ID has to be unique within the page, so that cannot be used for any other element. So that has to be the only one on that page, and we'll go more into that later on. Now, when we happen to be using Dreamweaver, what it does is it creates this box. But it also inserts some sample content there. But you see how I clicked on this section here? What that does is it allows me to grab that entire element so that you can see it, and it highlights it in blue. So what we're looking at is here we've got the div, opening tag, and closing tag. But within the opening tag, we give it the property of being an ID with the content of sample, and then inside here is the actual content of the div itself. You can nest divs. You can put a div inside of a div, and you often will. But what you can't do is have a div open inside of a div and close outside of it. So if you're going to open a div with inside another div, you also have to close that div inside of the div that it was originally opened in. And what that does is it creates a box that allows you to group content into it, and you can manipulate that content as a group. The last thing that we're going to look at is we're going to talk about hyperlinks. Now, hyperlinks, I'm going to go ahead and just create one here. Whoops, I need to apply that to something. Let's select this word one. And if I wanted that link, it's called an anchor when you're making it a link to another location. So if I wanted that number one to be an anchor to kevinwtharp.com, what I would do, actually I need to have the HTTP in there. What I would do is I would select that text, and what that does is it allows me to work in that context. So here's the word one, and what it did is it created an anchor tag, opening tag there, and a closing tag there. Within that anchor tag, it gave it the property of href, which is hypertext reference of http://kevinwtharp.com, which is HTTP is hypertext transfer protocol, which is the language that allows web pages to work. / is telling it that's just part of the semantics of how you would do it, and then it gives it the property that you're wanting it to go and access from that hypertext transfer protocol. And then, of course, you have the closing line item. So that is an anchor. You can use different kinds of URLs. So that's what this is, a uniform resource locator. When you're creating a linked anchor, you can use a absolute URL, or you could use just a file name. So if I had another file in here called test.html, what that would do is if I clicked on that, and I don't have a page set up right now, if I clicked on that in a browser, it's going to look in the same folder, and it's going to go and find test.html. We'll go more into relative versus absolute links later on, but relative links are links that are made relative to the file that it's in, and there's semantics that allow you to change that, go up levels, go up to the root level, etc. Versus if you want to go to an absolute location, then you put the URL. So we've got absolute versus relative links, and they behave in different ways in making that anchor into a hypertext link. And with that, that is going to be all that we're going to cover today. Look forward to seeing you in the next session.